This is activity 28, and it begins with Magna Carta. This is an important moment in the history of liberty in our legal tradition, because it is the first time in our tradition where we placed limits on a government through a written document, through a constitution. The country of England, their constitution is a little different from ours. We have ours all in one place, one document. It was ratified by the people of the United States. England has a bunch of different documents that together form the Constitution, I think along with the common law, and kind of the whole thing together is their Constitution. But in Magna Carta, you can see that the king, it's the we is referring to the king. The king agrees not to arrest, imprison, dispossess of his estate, outlaw, banish, in any way destroy a free man, unless that person is convicted of a crime in a trial, by lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. If you think about the way letter A is worded, you can see each one of those three rights that we talk about is mentioned there. Arrested is a violation of personal liberty, dispossessed of his estate, his property, destroyed, depriving them of life. So government here cannot harm citizens in life, liberty, or property unless that person's been convicted of a crime in a court of law by a jury of his or her peers. Letters B and C, the point here is just to kind of establish that a constitution is not made up of a bunch of words that are just open to interpretation and can mean anything that anybody wants. In letter B, it's clear that the people who wrote the Constitution and then offered it up for ratification were very, very careful to word it in a way that was clear and would make it clear what the federal government had the power to do and what it did not have power to do, as much as humanly possible. And the reason why is because there was a concern among the founders, as I think you've seen from the previous activity, that there be real limits on the federal government. If the words can mean whatever anybody says, then there's no limits, because it's the words that put the limits on them. So you especially don't want the federal government to be changing around the meaning of the words of the Constitution, because that gives the government the power to extend its power at will, which you don't want in this approach, in a liberty-based approach. You don't want government to be able to expand its powers indefinitely at will, because what about the evil side of government? You need limits to keep government from harming us. That was the opinion of the founders, at least. So you can see in letter C, Hamilton talking about the words due process as having a technical meaning. So when the Fifth Amendment says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, first of all, you can see that goes back all the way to 1215. So many, many centuries of tradition established what the Fifth Amendment means, because it's just Magna Carta in different words. And it always refers to the courts of justice, that nobody can be deprived of life, liberty, or property, can be executed, imprisoned, or fined unless they've been found guilty in a court of law of a crime by a jury of their peers. Letter D gets us into the Constitution, and this is an important part of the Constitution because it's a list, and a more or less complete list of what the federal government can do. The Congress shall have power too, and then it lists a number of things that it can do, and it ends with a period. In other words, this is the list of what the federal government can do, this is what Congress can do, and it's a limit, because if it's not on that list, they can't do it. That's the understanding that the founders had for this. And we'll look at some portions of this in the next activity about different parts of 1.8 and what they mean. But the important point I want to make about this is that it's meant as a complete list of the powers and a limit on what the federal government can do. There are, now if I say that, there are 1 or 2 or 3 places elsewhere in the U.S. Constitution where it says Congress shall have power too. So there are those, but this, together with those 2 or 3 places, is a complete list. Okay, so activity 29 is just a few other pretty easy to understand, I think, parts of the Constitution that I want you to see. Article 1, Section 9 is a limit on what Congress can do. So you have Article 1 is devoted to the legislature, 1.8 is the powers of Congress, 1.9 is limits on Congress. Now, you might ask, and students do ask, well, why does that need to be there if you just said that they're if Congress only has the powers in 1.8, why do you have to then go say that there are certain powers they don't have? There's a couple of reasons. For one thing, if you look at the first denial of power to Congress, it's denying Congress the power to put an end to the slave trade before 1808. What this is a limitation on a power that was granted in Article 1, Section 8. Article 1, Section 8 says that Congress can regulate commerce between countries. So this is an example of commerce between countries, buying and selling people. This is unfortunately referring to the buying and selling of people, slaves. And it's just putting a limit on that power to regulate commerce. You can regulate commerce, but you can't regulate the slave trade until 1808. Others of these are for greater caution. They just want to make it very, very clear that no bill of attainder shall be passed. A bill of attainder is when a legislature declares an individual person guilty of a crime and sentences them to death or some serious punishment or banishment. And you don't want a legislature to have that power because it bypasses the whole trial thing. So this is just something that they wanted to make extra clear for the purpose of safety, again, to keep this beast from harming innocent people. Article 1, Section 10 is a limit on what the states can do, and in letter C, the Bill of Rights of the first 10 amendments is a limit on the federal government. Now I want to mention, and this is, if you look in letter A or letter C, this is a constitution for the U.S. government, so we the people are always addressing the U.S. government unless it's otherwise stated. So if it says no bill of attainder shall be passed in Article 1, Section 9, it doesn't say which government is being addressed, but it's understood it's the U.S. government, Congress, and the U.S. government. In letter B, it's addressing states, but that's obvious, it's clear, because it's saying no state shall. Letter C, you can see other examples of this when it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It doesn't say which government has to obey that, but it's understood that it's the federal government because this is the U.S. Constitution. We're always addressing the federal government in this document. Letter D, 14th Amendment, is a list of limits on states, list of things that the states can't do. No state shall make or enforce any law. And the meaning of that amendment is something we're going to study later on.